Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. The blade pressed against my carotid artery was cold, but the eyes staring into mine were burning with a heat that had nothing to do with hatred and everything to do with a devastating, mutually assured destruction. "Pull the trigger, detective," he whispered, his voice a silken thread wrapped around a razor blade. "Expose me to them. Tell them their saint is a sinner. But know this. If I go down, I am dragging you into the abyss with me, and I promise you, the fall will be exquisite." Rain lashed against the stained glass windows of the grand manor, casting fracturing kaleidoscopes of colored light across the room, illuminating the chaos of our struggle. Overturned chairs, shattered porcelain, and the undeniable electric tension of two predators finally realizing they were starving for the same kill. To understand how I ended up with a dagger at my throat in the master bedroom of the most beloved man in Silver Creek, you have to understand the town itself. Silver Creek was a festering wound covered in expensive lace. It was a place where old money rotted in damp basements and new money tried desperately to buy titles that didn't exist anymore. And in the center of this sodden, gray little world sat Lord Lysander Vane. The widower. That was what they called him. Not Lord Vane. Not Lysander. Just the widower. He had arrived 6 months ago, draped in black velvet and an aura of tragic melancholy that had every spinster, debutante, and grandmother in a 50-mile radius weeping into their handkerchiefs. He claimed to have lost his wife, a fabricated beauty named Lenore, to a wasting sickness in the capital. He played the part of the grieving husband with the precision of a master surgeon. He donated to the orphanages, he funded the restoration of the crumbling church, and he walked the misty cliffs at dawn, looking out to sea with a longing that would make a poet jealous. The town adored him. They wanted to fix him. They wanted to be the one to bring a smile back to those sad, amethyst eyes. I, however, wanted to put him in handcuffs. My name is Kalen Thorne. I used to be a royal inquisitor before politics, and a penchant for drinking too much whiskey saw me dishonorably discharged. Now I was a private investigator for hire, scraping by on adultery cases and missing heirlooms. But when the Merchants Guild hired me to look into Lysander Vane, sensing a fraud that could destabilize the local economy, I smelled blood in the water. There was no record of a Lysander Vane in the capital. There was no record of a Lenore. The man was a ghost, a very wealthy, very charming ghost who had mesmerized an entire population into eating out of his manicured hand. I spent weeks trailing him. I watched him charm the baker's wife into giving him free bread, which he then fed to stray dogs when he thought no one was looking. I watched him attend the mayor's gala, declining every dance with a tragic, polite bow, claiming his heart was buried in a grave. But I saw the cracks. I saw the way he assessed the exits in every room he entered. I saw the way his hand twitched toward his waist, where a sword would hang, whenever a door slammed unexpectedly. And I saw the way he looked at me when he caught me watching him from the shadows of the tavern. He didn't look like a grieving husband then. He looked like a wolf deciding if I was worth the effort of the hunt. The confrontation that night began at the winter solstice masquerade. It was the social event of the season, a gaudy display of wealth amidst the winter gloom. Everyone was masked, hidden behind feathers and gold leaf, but I knew him instantly. He stood on the balcony, wearing a mask of black porcelain that covered the upper half of his face, leaving that cruel, beautiful mouth exposed. I approached him, clutching a glass of champagne I had no intention of drinking. "Enjoying the view, Lord Vane?" I asked, leaning against the stone railing beside him. He didn't jump. He didn't even turn his head. He simply took a slow sip of his wine. "Mr. Thorne, I was wondering when you would summon the courage to speak to me, rather than skulking in alleyways like a stray cat." "I'm not skulking," I replied, my voice low. "I'm observing. It's fascinating, really. The performance, the tragic tilt of the head, the melancholic sigh. You should be on stage in the capital, not wasting your talents on these provincials." Lysander turned to me then. Behind the black mask, his violet eyes glittered with amusement. We all wear masks, detective. Mine just happens to be made of grief. Yours appears to be made of cynicism and cheap whiskey. At least my mask is honest, I countered. I know who you are, Vane. Or rather, I know who you aren't. There was no Lenore. There is no Vane family fortune. You're a grifter. A con artist bleeding this town dry before you vanish into the night. He stepped closer, invading my personal space with a casual arrogance that made my breath hitch. He smelled of rain, expensive cologne, and something metallic, like the scent of ozone before a lightning strike. Is that what you think? He murmured, his voice dropping an octave. You think I'm here for their money? What else is there? He smiled, and it wasn't the sad, gentle smile he gave the townspeople. It was sharp, predatory, and devastatingly handsome. Perhaps I'm hiding. Perhaps I'm waiting. Or perhaps, Kalen, I'm just looking for someone who sees the world as clearly as I do. He reached out, his gloved fingers brushing the lapel of my coat, right over my heart. Be careful, detective. Curiosity killed the cat. But satisfaction brought it back, I retorted, catching his wrist. His pulse was slow, steady, unnaturally calm. Not always, he whispered. Sometimes, the cat just finds out that the mouse is actually a viper. He pulled away effortlessly and vanished back into the ballroom, leaving me standing in the cold air, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I knew then that I had to end this. Tonight, I skipped the rest of the party. Instead, I went to his estate. I knew the servants had been given the night off for the festival. The house would be empty. I picked the lock on the back entrance with a practiced ease, slipping into the silence of the manor. It was immaculate inside. Too clean. It didn't look lived in. It looked like a stage set. I moved through the hallways, my boots silent on the plush carpets, heading straight for the master bedroom. That was where he kept the shrine to his late wife. The room no one was allowed to enter. I pushed the door open. The room was dark, lit only by the moonlight filtering through the heavy curtains. I struck a match and lit the candelabra on the vanity. There was no shrine. There were no portraits of a beloved wife. No urns. No sentimental trinkets. Instead, the walls were covered in maps. Maps of the kingdom, maps of the trade routes, and detailed schematics of the royal palace. And on the table, laid out with military precision, were weapons. Not the decorative swords of a nobleman, but the tools of an assassin. Throwing knives, garrotes, vials of liquid that shimmered with ominous viscosity. And in the center of the table, a black ledger. I opened it. It was a list. Names, dates, payments. It wasn't a grifter's ledger. It was a hit list. And the name at the very bottom, the next target, wasn't a merchant or a noble. It was me. I told you, a voice said from the doorway. Curiosity is a dangerous thing. I spun around, my hand flying to the revolver at my hip, but I was too slow. Lysander was across the room in a blur of motion, a shadow detached from the darkness. He kicked the gun from my hand, the weapon skittering across the floor, and slammed me back against the heavy oak wardrobe. That brought us to the moment with the knife. Who are you? I choked out, trying to keep my chin up away from the blade. I am the consequence of your persistence, he hissed. His mask was gone now. His face was pale, his eyes wide and wild. Do you have any idea what you've done? I didn't come here to rob this town, you idiot. I came here to die. I blinked, the adrenaline momentarily confused by his confession. What? I retired, he spat, pressing his body harder against mine to pin me. I left the guild. I faked my death. Lenore was my cover story, the grief a shield to keep people away so I could live out my days in peace. But you just had to keep digging. You had to pull the thread. You have a hit list with my name on it. I yelled back. Because the guild found me, he roared, his composure finally cracking. That isn't my ledger, Kalen. It was left on my pillow this morning. They know I'm here. They know you're investigating me. They think we're working together or that you're a rival agent. That list is a warning. They are coming to kill us both. The silence that followed was deafening. The blade at my throat lowered an inch. They're coming, I asked, my voice hoarse. Tonight, Lysander said, stepping back, his chest heaving. He looked tired. For the first time, the glamorous facade was entirely gone, leaving a man who looked exhausted by a lifetime of violence. The solstice, the noise, the masks. It's the perfect cover for a liquidation squad. He walked over to the window, peering out through the crack in the curtains. I intended to leave alone, disappear before they arrived. But now, he looked back at me, his gaze lingering on my lips for a fraction of a second too long. Now you are involved. So you were going to kill me? I was going to scare you, he corrected. Make you run so far away they'd lose your scent. But you're too stubborn for your own good. Suddenly, the glass of the window next to him shattered. A black coral, a crossbow bolt, thudded into the wall exactly where his head had been a second before. Lysander moved with terrifying speed. He didn't flinch. He simply dropped to the floor, tackled me, and rolled us behind the overturned heavy oak bed frame just as a hail of bolts turned the window into jagged teeth. They're here, he said calmly, pulling 2 curved daggers from his boots. He offered one to me. Do you know how to use this, detective? I took the handle, the weight familiar and comforting. I prefer a gun, but I can manage. Good, he grinned. And in that darkness, with death raining down on us, he looked more alive than I had ever seen him. Because the Widow Act is officially over. What followed was a blur of violence and adrenaline that felt less like a battle and more like a dance we had been rehearsing for months. The assassins, the Obsidian Circle, as I later learned, swarmed the house. They were professionals, silent and lethal, clad in leather armor and masks. But they were not Lysander Vane. I watched him move, and it was terrifyingly beautiful. He was water and smoke. He flowed around their attacks, using their own momentum to send them crashing into walls or through railings. He didn't fight with anger. He fought with an efficiency that bordered on art. I held my own, my Inquisition training kicking in. I parried a sword thrust, drove my shoulder into an attacker's solar plexus, and finished him with the hilt of the dagger. But I was rusty. We were cornered in the grand hallway. Fire had started in the library, the smoke billowing out, choking the air. 5 of them formed a semicircle around us. We can't win this, I coughed, eyes stinging. Not if we stay, Lysander agreed. He stood back to back with me, his body heat radiating through my soaked coat. Trust me. Do I have a choice? No. He grabbed a heavy velvet tapestry hanging on the wall, a priceless antique depicting a hunt, and ripped it down, throwing it over the 3 assassins nearest the stairs. In the confusion, he grabbed my hand. Run! We sprinted. Not out the front door, but up the grand staircase, toward the attic. Where are we going? I yelled over the roar of the fire. The roof! We burst onto the slate roof of the manor, the rain instantly soaking us to the bone. The wind howled, whipping Lysander's hair across his face. Below, the town of Silver Creek was waking up to the fire, alarms bells ringing in the distance. The assassins were behind us, crashing through the attic door. Jump! Lysander commanded, pointing toward the hayloft of the stables below. It was a suicide drop. At least 3 stories. You're insane. I'm in love, he shouted back, the words torn away by the wind, but I heard them. I froze. He looked at me, his eyes wide, realizing what he'd slipped up and said in the heat of the moment. He didn't take it back. Instead, he grabbed my lapels and pulled me into a kiss that tasted of rain, blood, and desperation. It was hard, bruising, and searingly hot. It was a promise and an apology all at once. I'm in love with the chase, he corrected breathlessly, pulling back, though his eyes betrayed him. And I'm not letting you die, Kaelin. He wrapped his arms around me, shielding my head with his shoulder, and threw us off the roof. The fall was terrifying. The impact was worse. We crashed through the thatched roof of the stables and landed in a mountain of hay. I groaned, every bone in my body protesting, but nothing felt broken. Lysander was already up, pulling me to my feet. Move. My horses are saddled. I prepared them days ago. We mounted 2 jet-black stallions, bursting out of the stable doors just as the manor behind us was consumed by a fireball, the roof collapsing inward with a sound like a dying dragon. We rode. We rode until the cobblestones of Silver Creek turned to dirt, and the dirt turned to the wild, untamed grass of the hinterlands. We rode until the horses were foaming and the sun began to bleed over the horizon, painting the sky in bruised purples and bloody oranges. We stopped near a ridge overlooking the valley. The smoke from his estate was a thin gray line in the distance. The town, the lies, the widower. It was all gone. I slid off my horse, my legs shaking, and collapsed onto the wet grass. Lysander dismounted and walked over to me. He looked wrecked. His velvet coat was torn, his cheek was cut, and soot stained his pale skin. He looked magnificent. "You lost everything," I said, looking at the smoke. "Your fortune, your home, your cover." He sat down next to me, resting his elbows on his knees. "I kept the only thing that mattered." He reached into his boot and pulled out a small, heavy pouch. He tossed it to me. It clanked with the sound of heavy gold and gems. "And I have enough emergency funds to get us to the Southern Isles. The guild won't look for us there. The sun is too bright for them." "Us?" I asked, clutching the pouch. "I was hired to arrest you, Lysander. Or expose you. And now you're an accomplice to arson, flight from justice, and the killing of guild members," he pointed out, a smirk touching his lips. "I'm afraid your career as a private investigator is over, Mr. Thorne." I looked at him, the enemy I had hunted, the liar who had charmed a town, the man who had just saved my life. "Why?" I asked. "Why didn't you just let them kill me? It would have been cleaner." Lysander reached out, his hand cupping my jaw. His thumb traced the line of my bottom lip. "Because, Kalen, for 6 months, I have been surrounded by people who loved a lie. They loved the widower. They loved the saint. You were the only one who looked at me and saw the monster. You were the only one who saw the truth." He leaned in, his forehead resting against mine. "And nothing is more intoxicating than being truly seen." I closed my eyes, leaning into his touch. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion and a strange, terrifying thrill. I had lost my job, my reputation, and my home. I was on the run with a retired assassin who had arguably ruined my life. "The Southern Isles," I muttered. "I hear the wine is cheap there." Lysander laughed, a genuine, bright sound that had no deception in it. "The wine is terrible, but the sunsets are extraordinary." He stood up and offered me his hand. "Coming, partner?" I looked at his hand. The hand of a killer. The hand of a savior. I took it. "Lead the way," I said. We mounted the horses again, turning our backs on Silver Creek, on the ashes of the life he had built and the life I had endured. We rode into the rising sun, 2 runaways with blood on our hands and a future that was unwritten, dangerous, and completely, undeniably ours. And that is how the detective caught the ghost, by letting the ghost steal him away. If you enjoyed seeing Lysander drop the mask and claim what was his, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments, would you run away with a beautiful liar if it meant leaving your whole life behind? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then.